We're excited to have you all here. Just as a housekeeping item, all of the people outside will actually be engaging in conversation. We do want you to know that we are deeply apologetic that they cannot all come in, but to practice social distancing, we have to make sure that we keep you guys spaced. Can you please make sure that your phones are off at this time? In addition to that, if you need to move around, make sure that you're moving with everyone aware that you're making a movement so that we're all comfortable during this press. All of our speakers will take 3 to 5 minutes, but we will begin by starting off with our founder and CEO of Self-Enhancement, Tony Hobson Sr.
Again, let me just add my welcome. I just want to do a short welcome bit. First, I want to just say thank you to Lieber Ford, who is the COO here at Self-Enhancement, for kind of stepping in at the last minute and emceeing this for us. We really appreciate that. Also want to say thank you to Jamal Fox and Nike Green for all of their behind-the-scenes efforts to put this together. They put in a lot of work with some real heartfelt thinking about our community and the opportunity to speak to you today. So I want to thank them. Also want to say thank you to Mayor Wheeler, our other officials that may be here, clergy that we know are here, our community, and the media for caring enough to be here this afternoon. So welcome, as Lieber said, to the Center for Self-Enhancement, one of the few Black-owned businesses and Black landmarks left in inner Northeast Portland. That's another whole subject matter that we could talk about, actually. Over the past few days, we have experienced much pain and disbelief. We have peacefully demonstrated at Peninsula Park and peacefully demonstrated at Pioneer Square, and we have shared our pain through that process. We have also witnessed riots that cause even more pain, and a press conference with broad representation that eloquently shared their pain and discussed over the recent events of George Floyd and the riots. Our goal today is to get beyond the pain and speak directly to Black people about moving past our pain, recognizing our purpose, and creating a plan that we can control and implement in the future. Again, I will be back later to speak. At this time, again, just welcome and thank you for being here. Lieber?
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. So like I said earlier, we have 7 speakers. They will each speak about 3 to 5 minutes. At the end of this, we will give you an opportunity to have a Q&A for our press. First, we will begin with Mayor Ted Wheeler.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to stand with you today, particularly when the Black community is in deep mourning for the lives needlessly lost to police violence. Most recently, of course, George Floyd, and for the steady and persistent reminder of this nation's continuing disregard for Black lives. I don't take my presence or my participation here this afternoon lightly. It means a lot to me to be here, and I will keep my remarks brief. But first, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the many difficult but necessary conversations I've had with friends and colleagues and many partners in the Black community. I want all of you to know, without any doubt, that I understand the significance of the moment in which we all find ourselves right now. And I acknowledge that the violence and the rioting, the property destruction that we're seeing on the streets of this community and across the nation is the manifestation of a much bigger context. It's a direct response to years of systematic injustice. No, I will not condone violence. In maintaining the safety of this community, I will not support the rioting or the looting or the burning that we have seen. But I also want to acknowledge some important historical context. I know and I understand that agitation in all of its forms, and yes, even occasionally violent agitation, has historically occurred with purpose and resulted in change that has moved this nation forward. People are hurting. Our community is grieving. It didn't just happen in Minneapolis, and to assume so disrespects the lives of those Black individuals who've died there and right here in our own community. As Portlanders, we recognize that we have a deep reckoning to do. Educational disparities, health disparities, housing disparities, employment disparities, even disparities in lifespan. All of these things place the Black community at a worsening disadvantage. To the community, I ask for your voice, and I hear you, and I see you. I recognize the pain and the frustration that you're feeling right now. What is abundantly clear to me right at this point as I stand here as your mayor is that the terms of forgiveness cannot come from the entity that inflicted the wrongdoing in the first place, which is why we must center the Black community. Black voices must be elevated when we're talking about impact, when we're talking about restorative justice, when we're talking about reconciliation, and when we're talking about healing. Today, we're surrounded by many leaders in the Black community, and all of you here are leaders in one manner or another, and we're standing together, and we're calling on all of us to do more and to do better. We've been in crisis, but our government has been too slow to act, too slow to respond. Here in Portland, that means me as mayor. I need to do more. I need to do much better. And going forward, I'll continue to work with the community to develop anti-racist policies and vetting recommendations from civic groups like those represented here today who have been engaged in this work. And I recognize that that in and of itself isn't necessarily enough. But it is another important step towards unpacking and dismantling the systematic history of racist oppression right here in Portland and all across our nation. And we will, no matter how long it takes, we will do so that all of us, and most acutely, our Black community, can feel safe, can be heard, and be valued. We need accountability. We need justice. We need you. It's not acceptable to rest this responsibility on the shoulders of the Black community, which has been doing this work for decades. And I know some of you in this room who have been doing that work for decades. And I cannot tell you the sense of awe and the sense of respect and the sense of love I feel towards you for having taken that mantle upon your own shoulders for all of these years. You have earned the opportunity to step back and enjoy respite while people like me take the responsibility on our shoulders and continue to work with the community and for the community in this important cause. Now, many of you in this room know me, and you know that this does not always come as naturally for me as I'd like it to. As a white person, I understand that I have privileges that other people do not. And I know that I speak on behalf of a power structure that has excluded and worked against the interests of people of color for too long. I am committed to using my privilege to end the long history of injustices wrought against people of color in our community. I pray for humility. I pray for strength. And I pray for the wisdom to see with clarity and to lead with purpose. And I know that standing shoulder to shoulder with you will answer those prayers and then some. There may be times when I don't communicate with clarity or even with the sensitivity that the moment calls us to exhibit. For that, I want you to know that it's always my intention to understand and to articulate and to support. I won't always get it right, but I will always do my best. And no matter what, I'll be standing with you. I'll be standing with you. And I want you to know that we share the same vision and the same goals towards achieving the potential of our collective humanity. Let's be clear. There is real trauma here. There is real pain here. There's a process of healing that must be engaged with clarity, with purpose, and with intentionality and results in mind. And I want you to know, I will do everything in my power, with my last breath if it's required, to lead in that healing alongside all of you. Thank you for the privilege of letting me serve in this capacity, and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Mayor, for that promise and commitment. Next, we will have Mr. Ronnie Herndon, Director of Albina Head Start.
Libra, thank you very much. And Tony, thank you again for making SCI available for the community to come together so that we can talk with one another. A lot of discussion. Being back here, look around, and whoever thought we'd have a moment like this where everybody's dressed up like a bandit just to come out and see and talk to one another. Everybody's got a mask on. You can't sit next to each other. And it struck me, yes, COVID and its pandemic is wreaking havoc all across this country and certainly in our communities across this country. But COVID has an older brother, another pathogen that's been with the black community for hundreds of years. That pathogen is called racism. You can't put a mask on to protect us from racism. We can't distance far enough to protect us from racism. Our children still don't get an adequate education so that they can live independent lives. None of the mask in the world, the distancing, has made a difference for them. We still, every organization represented back here, are dealing with the misery our community is going through now, getting food to people, getting diapers to people. making sure that people, I even had one family where the mama and child was sleeping on the floor. Think about that. In the year 2020, a mother and child have to sleep on the floor. And no, they're not hippies. They're not doing that out of some kind of cultural revolution. Don't have enough food. That's what we grapple with every day. So racism for us, that's the original pandemic in this country. And it cannot be escaped with some what you call the spray? Purell doesn't get rid of it. The other spray that they got us, I don't want to use that expression, but it is so bad. A partner of mine said that when he urinates, he cleans the toilet out because of all the chemicals he's got in the system trying to keep from catching this. And let me just say this. In watching the news, it appears as if most of the folks who are tearing up downtown and other parts of the city are younger white people. That's what it appears. I'm not sure of the motivation. I never want to guess at what somebody intends to do or why they do it. But I can say this. If somehow you think that doing that is a way to express your rage at what may have happened to you or your friends, it's ineffective. If somehow you think that tearing up is going to help black people, you are sadly mistaken. Please don't think that you're doing us any favors by tearing stuff up. We have been the victims of that ever since 1619 when that slave ship arrived. We've had our communities, mobs tear our communities up before. We've had our schools burned down. We've had our churches blown up. So when you think that somehow going out and destroying property and stealing, that's what it is, ain't looting, it's stealing, that you are helping us, you are sadly mistaken. So whatever you do, I know us and all the other speeches that are given here today will not change the minds of most people who are doing it. But I caution you, please look at history. In several of these instances, the people who jumped to the front of the line, you find out later on that they were paid to do that. I'm not making this up. They were paid to do that. We used to have the same thing here in Portland when the Black United Front would have a demonstration. There's a group of so-called white radicals who wanted to run to the front of the line with their little hammers and sickles and banners. We took them down. I mean, ushered them off to the side. Politely ushered them to the side. So please get that part right. So for those of you who think that somehow those who run to the front of the line and talk about breaking this and breaking that they're doing that to help black people, not at all. So I just want to end by saying we've been through this before. As a community, we've seen this pandemic before. We've gotten through it by holding hands and working hard together and believing in a better day. And we fight every morning, along with you, to see that better day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Herndon, for grounding us in your words. Next, we have Ms. Kali Thorne Ladd, co-founder and executive director of Kairos PDX.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As I thought about my remarks this morning, all I could see were my children, my 8-year-old son and my 11-year-old daughter, and the wondering of what does all of this look like through their eyes. I see their beauty and innocence, their intellect and brilliance, and I wonder how and when the world will snatch that away from them. And then my head begins to spin. I'm not just a mom, I've devoted my life and career to children, and I'm always palpably aware of their presence. I know they are watching what we do and what we don't do. They're watching what we say and what we don't say. Every moment is instructive to children, and they are listening for something. And if they only hear silence, their heads are filled with noise. And this noise can be fear, it can be depression, it can be complacency, it can be grief. And while, like Brother Herndon said, I don't condone the looting or the vandalism, I know that it is a symptom and not a problem. And I know that for me, it personifies how I feel inside. And I wonder sometimes if this is an opportunity to help my children see this, that as wrong as it may be, it is a symbol of our shattering, our devastation, our internal beating every time we see a life lost like George Floyd. George Floyd called out to his mother. His cry reaches the heart of all of us moms. And we see our sons and daughters, and we are in shambles. But I do think there is hope. And I think there is hope because I come from a people who carry hope across generations. A people who, despite devastation and terrorization and oppression, have written spirituals that lift this whole nation up in hope. A people that have strengthened the very fiber of our being, even when forces are taking away our breath. I also think there is hope because I study neuroscience and psychology and child development, and these things tell us we can create a new narrative. But as mothers and fathers and educators, we have to be intentional. It does not happen by chance. Our brains are incredible, miraculous things that can be wired and rewired by the words and actions that we do. They call this neuroplasticity. And the science tells us that our children are not born hating other children or rendering certain people invisible. This happens over time. Every circumstance is a data point that forms an idea. Watching a black boy in preschool get kicked out of class repeatedly is a data point. Pretending as though the founding of our country did not come at the hands of genocide is a data point. Silence in the aftermath of killing is a data point. And these data points form ideas, and these ideas form schema. And this schema dictates behavior. We are developing racist schema and reinforcing racist ideas in the minds of our children when we fail to talk to them about racism, when we fail to tell the truth about history, when we fail to point out injustice, whether it is overt or covert. You see, when we put children in the center of our lives, our comfort or discomfort becomes less important. Our words today can save lives tomorrow. Our children are the souls we'll send into a time that many of us will never see. When we are stressed, what's inside comes out. When Amy verbally attacked Mr. Cooper watching birds in Central Park, what was inside of her came out. Let that be a lesson to us all. But what was inside of Mr. Cooper also came out. Let him be an example of what happens when we build in our children the moral character of calm and grace and forgiveness, even when our lives are being threatened. The neuroscience and social science tells us that diversity matters. As human beings, we dehumanize what we don't know. We fear what we don't understand. Our brains will rely on the data derived by sound bites and stereotypes instead of facts when we don't have real people of different races and backgrounds in our lives. My friend Toya Fick wrote an op-ed in yesterday's Oregonian about the importance of retaining teachers of color. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this is so well timed, because this is something that we can actually do right now. This is a way to actively combat racialized violence in our schools. When we do this, we make our schools safer for our black children. We break down fear for our white children, and collectively, our children get one step closer to seeing the humanity of one another. And this is everything, because I believe that when a white child can see the humanity of my black son, it becomes much harder to crush him with their knees. Diversity is not just anti-racist, it is humane. The list can go on, but I will stop here. Let there be no question that there is something that we can do right here and right now to change the course of history, and I believe it lies with our children. It lies with the roadmap we are building in their brains every day. It lies in the ways that we wire and rewire their brains. We are giving them data every single day that informs their schema with the words we use or don't, the care we give or withhold, the people they see or don't. I can't think of any greater light in this darkness than them. So let's collectively illuminate their lights, strengthen them to understand the tenuous tentacles of racism so they can dismantle them. And let's love them, especially our Black children. Love them, love them, love them so they are resilient and strong in the face of oppression. Don't dismiss their pain and don't exacerbate it. Talk up to them and don't talk down to them. Collectively, let's do what it takes to build in our children a foundation that can effectively disrupt the patterns of injustice and destroy the strongholds of hatred that brings us all here today. Children, I do believe, are not just the future. I believe they are our greatest hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ladd, for, of course, reminding us, as we all partner in advocating for children, just how important it is for us to set up a stage for our youth. Next, we have Mr. Joe McFerrin, the second president and CEO of Portland OIC and Rosemary Anderson School.
Thank you, Libra. I can't believe that I've been selected to go after Mr. Ronnie Herndon and Kali, but I'll do my best. So, good afternoon. I'm honored to be here with you today to share a few thoughts about how we might begin to help our youth and families in the African American community while in the throes of the disparate impacts of COVID-19 and its health emergency. And now, the recent incidents here in Portland and throughout the United States stemming from the outrage and anger of the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police. In 1974, as a 5-year-old kid living 2 blocks from here, my family went through a similar experience when Portland police shot my uncle, Ricky Johnson, in the back of the head. So I know a little something about this type of pain. Before COVID-19 hit and before the George Floyd killing, the African American community struggled to be equitably treated by systems designed to help and protect. Sadly, we have not been able to break down systemic and structural barriers that have historically contributed and continue to contribute to the disparate social determinants of health and our outcomes. As a researcher from Multnomah County recently said and explained on April 30th, because they are more likely to do public-facing work, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are contracting the virus at a higher rate. And because of the unequal access to health care and higher rates of chronic disease stemming from centuries of inequitable access to health care, jobs, homes, and lifestyle, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color are more likely to die from COVID-19. Before COVID-19, the unemployment rate for African Americans in Oregon was about 6%. Since March 15th, over 7,200 African Americans have filed for unemployment, bringing the unemployment rate to approximately 23% in our community. Before COVID-19, 13.5% of the Black community in Multnomah County were homeless, disproportionately representing 16.1% of the total population of the unsheltered. We can assume that these rates have increased dramatically since the health crisis began. Before COVID-19, 38% of African Americans lived below the poverty level. This is disproportionate, as we represent 6% of the population overall, yet represent 12% of the population living below the federal poverty line. I can only imagine what these disparities look like post-COVID-19 as job loss continues unabated. Before the killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer brought continued injustices to light, African American adults were already 4.8 times likely as white adults to have a case issued for prosecution, and were 4.6 times as likely to have a case that ends in a conviction. Despite the unsettling past and present pain of being black in Oregon, I have hope that together we can change the plight of our people by giving them a hand up. Although the circumstances are shameful, sad, frustrating, and horrific, there remains an opportunity for us to continue to work together towards change and reducing COVID disparities, especially economic disparities, and this will give us tangible and a present opportunity to make change. I am so excited about working with my colleagues here on the platform and other community-based organizations in the audience, elected and public officials, private corporations, large and small, to create a robust employment, training, and placement opportunities as we begin to reopen Multnomah County, where African Americans from ages 16 to senior will have the opportunity to get back to work. And so, despite the circumstances, I am looking ahead. I am excited about my work with the Mayor's Economic Task Force to ensure that African Americans in the community gets the intended support and the benefits from the CARE Act's funding allocated to our city. And despite the continued fear and oppression, and indeed because of it, I'm excited that African American school-age youth will have an opportunity to participate in summer school and summer paid internships with the support and collaboration with the City of Portland, Multnomah County, and local businesses. In closing, to parents and guardians in the greater African American community in Oregon, all of us are hurting. It is critical that we work together and we redouble our resolve to do so. Although I look around today and this week and see a shameful, sad, and frustrating world, I see the light and hope, and I ask that you join all of us, we all work together on this path forward together. I look forward to being a part of the solutions for our community, and thank you for giving me an opportunity today to make a few remarks.
I think y'all can do better than that, considering he had to speak after these beautiful speakers. Yes, thank you, Joe, for those great words. Next, we have Ms. Rakaya Adams, co-founder and board chair of the Albina Vision Trust.
Well, Joe had the misfortune of following Ronnie and Kali. I have the misfortune of following Joe's fashions, which are pretty slick. He's looking good. And those shoes, I did not make such a good choice myself. A few thoughts about the press conference that Chief Boone and Commissioner Hardesty spoke at earlier in the week. They spoke so clearly about the pain and rage that spills out from our hearts on watching the violence against our people. We've seen it so many times before, and they managed to capture what it really feels like in this collective response triggered by the murder of George Floyd. They also spoke with authority about the serious civic disorder and destruction that's taking place in our community by bad actors. Their leadership for all of Portland affords me the opportunity to speak directly to Black Portlanders today. And this is what I have to say. So much of the narrative has focused on the reaction after Mr. Floyd's murder, the protests, the property damage, what some call riots, others see as looting and arrests. And I understand why there's some focus on that to some degree. It is consequential and newsworthy. It's newsworthy and consequential for complicated reasons. I hope you come back for another press conference where we can talk about some real looting that happens with white-collar folks taking money from our recovery efforts. But that's a whole other press conference that we'll talk about later. It will take us years, decades, maybe even lifetimes to unpack what has happened here. But we cannot wait for the clarity of tomorrow to take care of each other today. And today, what doesn't sit well with me, what's not sitting well in my heart, is that in the face of staggering, persistent, and inhumane justice, the focus of the public story has been diverted to miscreants and disorder. So this I ask of you, Black Portlanders, let's see this differently. Let's speak of it differently. Because broken windows may be factual, but they are not the whole truth. Likewise, expressions of rage and pain, they may be visible, but they are not our whole truth. More than expressions of rage, what has happened since Mr. Floyd's murder is a deep expression of love, a love that transcends state boundaries, a love that goes far beyond familial name. We cry out because we have the courage to open our eyes and our hearts to listen to George Floyd's call for his mother as he was suffocated on a public street in broad daylight. Loving that hard takes courage. His voice is the voice of any of us. It is the voice of all of us. We marched to heal the 9-year-old girl who was a bystander. Her name was Judea Reynolds. She was visiting Minneapolis from Cleveland with her family. She was standing nearby. Loving Judea and healing that terrible experience for her requires that we love each other hard. Her memory is the memory of any of us. It is Joe's memory. It is my memory. It is the memory of all of us. We press on together and march in the streets in cities around the country with steely resolve to tell that young woman, Darnella Frazier, the 17-year-old girl who captured the murder on her cell phone, to tell her that we love her. Loving that hard takes endurance. Hers is the memory and the testimony of any of us. It is the testimony of all of us. So if they ask me what the hell is going on in the streets of Portland, I will not say a broken window, even if it were destroyed by an anarchist, because that is merely a fact. It is not the truth. The truth is that George Floyd's murder and its response on a global scale is an expression of love the likes of which we have never seen. I am in awe of these young people putting their lives and bodies at risk to express something that is important for our collective humanity. So to the Black people, the young Black folks in the street, I say, we know you were the generation born into this recorded and broadcasted violence against our people. You were nursed with the news of Trayvon Martin. You came into adulthood with Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And it's not just a national story. You saw it happen here with Quanice Hayes and Terrell Johnson and Aaron Campbell and many, many others. And as I see it, it is almost inconceivable that you have taken our hate and our violence and our failure and our indifference and somehow magically turned it into collective action and love. So in these dark times, young people, when it is so hard for many of us to see the truth, your ability to demand an end to this horrible violence and then transform all of this bad into strength and love has taught us that we do not need to seek the light. We are the light. March toward justice, young people, and the rest of us will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams, for that truth serum that we all often need. Next, we have Bishop C.T. Wells, Senior Pastor of Emmanuel Church, Portland, Oregon.
Thank you, Libra, and to His Honor the Mayor, to our brother Tony for his hospitality, and to now I have to say that we didn't properly introduce Brother Ronnie Herndon. He is affectionately known in our circle as Uncle Ronnie. So you need to, if you'll do me the honor in addressing him properly, I would appreciate it. To Rakaya and to Joe and to all of you that are here today, Brother Tony, everyone that is here today, Kylie, and to all of those that labor and work for the betterment of our city, I would like to ask every pastor and every faith leader if you would stand so that we can acknowledge you again, every pastor and every faith leader. Thank you so much. You are the standard bearers that serve our people and minister to our people on a weekly basis. And so you certainly have our prayers and our support, and we thank you for your leadership. This morning I awakened with two images that came to mind. The first, after having kind of been up all night and thinking about this moment that we're in and the difficulties that we face. And as propagators of the gospel, you often try to determine what you can say and what you can do to mitigate the pain and speak the truth. Now more than ever, there's the need for a prophetic word that comes from the mouth of God that speaks and quiets the fears and brings clarity and truth. And so this morning there were two images that came to my mind. The first image is an image of our dear brother Floyd, and it's affixed on the Berlin Wall in Germany. And then the second image is I saw a report that came out, and they were interviewing some people in Great Britain about this situation. Little did I know to what degree his death and the tragedy associated with his death and the images associated with his death has impacted the world. Just as if this pandemic has impacted the world, so too has his death and the images associated with that. The second image that I saw was the image of his brother. And he's lamenting, and he's weeping, and he's crying. And he says these words, and they just resonate in my ear in such a profound way. He says, "I don't understand." And as I thought about that, and I thought about seeing his brother near death with a knee on his neck, just literally suffocating the life out of him, I asked the question, how can you be so close to an individual and in such a protracted way see life leaving them and it doesn't touch you? How can you do this? Where does that come from? And I heard this, I'm not in church, so I don't want to over spiritualize this, but I heard the loss of a heart. The heart is an interesting thing. life teaches us certain things. It brings certain realities to us. Early on, we learned you don't touch a hot stove because the pain attached to that, you experience it, and so it teaches you certain things. There's certain things that we learn when we experience or when we run across someone who's experienced pain because we have experienced pain. But when you take a person whose assignment is to protect and to serve, what I fear that happens often is in this effort to serve, the heart becomes callousized, and so you lose the sense to feel, the inability to feel what other people feel. Now I'm just in a devotional moment here just for a moment, but one of the things that as we look at the pain, as we look at the purpose, and we look at the plan, one of the things that we want to discuss is what does it mean to feel when someone else is experiencing pain? What does it feel when you drive by and you see a person that's in a broken situation? And so one of the things that I pray for in this moment is that we would return and really cultivate a heart of flesh. The ability to feel what other people feel. I know we say that there are circumstances that may or may not be beyond our control, but what we certainly can do, we certainly can feel what other people feel and do something about it. If I had a church, I'd ask for an amen right there. So what I sense in this moment is that we want to return to a place of feeling. Return to a place where we have empathy for people that are hurting. I don't understand how a man just close to a body like this could do what was done, but we saw it done. And so what my prayer is that for us, that we would regain a sense of feeling, a sense of knowing what it is like for people to experience brokenness, what it is like to experience pain and misfortunes. And so one of the things that we're doing and we're excited about this is that here on next week, Brother Tony will talk more about it, on next week we're going to be doing testing. We decided we're going to make a difference in our community. So you'll be able to come here, I believe at no charge, and he can talk about that, and you can get testing. As well as at Emmanuel Church, the same day on the 6th of June at 12 noon, if there's someone that doesn't have food, we'd like to be able to offer them something to help them get along, to meet with the difficulties that flow and that they have. I'm recognizing that my transition, as I look at ministry, it's no longer about worshiping within the walls of the church, but how can I take the ministry of the church and the resources of the church and touch people? And so I'd like to offer two thoughts in the scriptures as I prepare to close. One is found in Isaiah chapter 10. And in Isaiah chapter 10, he speaks to the pain of brokenness. And he talks about the yoke that shall be destroyed because of the anointing. Can I suggest to you, as a propagator of the gospel and as a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that certain things are only going to change when the church makes the decision that we've got to get back to our knees and to pray. Yes, we're going to need to implement strategies and systems, but the church must be praying while we implement strategies, while we pray for our leaders. There is the anointing that the scripture says, it breaks the yoke. Now that word yoke in the Greek, in the Hebrew rather, that word is symbolic of religious and political and economic oppression. That yoke was around the neck. Isn't that interesting that the attack on our dear brother came around the neck? The artery was attacked, and so his life was snuffed out, all in close proximity to him. So the text says that the yoke shall be destroyed because of the anointing. Yes, we're going to march. Yes, we're going to strategize, but there's a group of us that's going to pray. I wish I had a church in here. There's a group of us that are going to seek the face of God. And then the last text as I close is in the 58th chapter of Isaiah also. And he talks about the repairer of the breach. He talks about raising up a foundation of many generations and showing them the path to dwell. When I think of the foundation of this building, when I raise the foundation of this building, everybody in this building rises. Yeah, it's not just an individual here or an individual there, but the entire foundation of this place, when it rises, everybody that rests on this foundation rises. So my prayer for us is that God would give us, put super in our natural, to reveal to us what we need to do in this hour. We need a word from the Lord, because the demonic force that we're dealing with, racism, bias, bigotry, that is an old demon. Yeah, that demon has been around for centuries. And we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So I pray that as we come to the close and we contemplate what our next steps are, let's ask God to give us a heart of flesh so that we feel what others feel. Can I offer a moment of prayer? Father, I thank you for your grace and mercy. I thank you for this moment that you've given us. May we come out of this better than we went in Jesus' name.
Thank you, Bishop Wells, for reminding us about feelings. Before we bring up our last speaker, I just want to recap some of the things that have been said. We've got some promises from our mayor. We're reminded about the grounding of racism. And then, of course, we're also reminded about what we do for youth. Statistically, we've seen some things through Mr. McFerrin. True Serum came out here, and then we just were reminded about feelings and the uplifting of foundation. You are here at the center of self-enhancement, where we are uplifting and prioritizing the voice of Black leaders. Now you will hear from our founder and CEO, Mr. Tony Hobson, Sr.
So again, thank you, Ms. Libra. I mean, we have heard a lot of good word, so I'm going to be short as we bring this to a close. And as we said in the beginning, this was a message to Black people, our Black community. So what I want to say to our Black community is to not be distracted. The George Floyd murder, the riots, are a painful, painful distraction that moves us away from the plan. These distractions are moments, but what I think is that we really, really need a movement. Not a moment, but a movement. We spend a lot of time on these moments, but we have not consistently put together another movement. A movement that is consistent and sustainable. A movement that requires a unity of purpose and an implementation of a plan. A plan that educates Black children. A plan that provides jobs and support for Black businesses. A plan to house the haves and the have-nots, and a plan to get health care to all that actually need it. We can't legislate how people feel about us, and we can't legislate what people think about us, but we can legislate how we hold people accountable for what they do to us. Just a little justice can go a long way towards healing. But recognizing our own Black leadership, our Black wealth, our Black courage, our Black survival, and our Black creativity can also be healing. Black people, let's just do us. We need to vote. We need to fill out the consensus paperwork, support Black businesses, hold Black leadership accountable, and we need to put personal feelings aside and engage Black unity of purpose as one. As the bishop said, we can start that purpose on June 6th. The first purpose that we ought to be concerned about is staying alive. COVID-19 did not stop because we became distracted. The county and OHA, in partnership with Self-Enhancement, Inc., will be providing COVID-19 free testing for Black people. Now, this ain't happened nowhere else in Oregon. Free testing for Black people with symptoms, and those who may be asymptomatic can come and go through the testing protocols again on June 6th. We will be providing more information about this and the logistics and the structure of that testing early next week. So be in touch with us. We are expecting a lot of folks that have just been waiting, and we know that it's disproportionately impacting us, and we know that there's a lot of asymptomatic folks walking around out there giving it to other folks and just have not been tested. So our first plan should be how to stay alive and healthy. Our second plan should be engaging in our unity and purpose in the planful areas we've talked about here this afternoon. And lastly, we should continue to apply pressure on the mayor, the city, the county, and the state that equity becomes more than a word, it actually becomes a reality. I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Lieber, and I think we're going to entertain a few questions.
One more round of applause for these excellent speakers. Thank you all. I want to take a moment to recognize outside there is a wonderful conversation happening. As we're in here having this wonderful conversation, there are people having a peaceful conversation about solutions and action that we can do to move forward. I think it's important that we recognize that we have Black leaders here who have come together to make sure that we have an answer. So one more time, give them a big round of applause. We are now going to move to question and answer period, and Adam Thompson will lead you in that. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to open up some questions to media. What I'll do is I'll have members of the media raise their hand, and I'll come to you with this microphone so that viewers can hear your questions. I'll ask that you introduce yourself and your affiliation before you ask your question. And one thing I'd also like to try, once we have someone at the podium, I'm going to make a call for any additional questions for that person. Before we move on to more questions. So I'll do my best to try to keep track of hands and get you in order. So I'll keep an eye out for hands if anybody has any questions. Okay.
Hi there, this is Megan Allison with K2. I have a question for Mayor Wheeler. Mayor Wheeler, you had addressed some of the disparities that we see in the community and say that you need to be doing more. What specific action do you plan to be taking moving forward?
I think there's several areas where the city has and addressed systematic disparities, first around economic disparities. We know that prior to the COVID crisis, Black families, but families of color generally, were well behind the majority community in terms of both wage as well as wealth generation. My biggest concern about the COVID crisis from an economic perspective was that those disparities that existed prior to COVID would actually be exacerbated by COVID. And there's data to suggest that that is already the case based on who is losing their jobs, who is losing access to resources, support, and retirement security. So the Economic Impact Task Force, and there's a number of people in this room that are actively engaged in that, we started with those communities that were hurt first and those communities that were hurt the worst, and we have centered communities of color in our recovery efforts. We've identified longer-term strategies that could help address some of the disparities we've seen as broad as access to broadband and closing the digital divide, to lifting, engaging, and supporting small businesses that are owned and operated by people of color. In our budget that we just approved, has not formally been adopted yet, but the approved budget that the City of Portland just supported had universal support from all of us on the Portland City Council to continue to support initiatives like the Portland Mean Progress initiative that we started a couple of years ago to lift employment opportunities for people of color in our community, the Inclusive Business Resource Network that continues to support our minority owned and operated businesses. when it comes to policing, what I heard loudly and clearly from the community is the community wanted a direct say, a direct voice in both oversight as well as being able to evaluate and make recommendations and hold accountable our police bureau. So we created the Portland Committee on Community Aged Policing, and I see at least one of our co-chairs here today, and I appreciate the great work that they are doing. When it comes to health disparities that was mentioned by myself and several speakers today, typically the city of Portland doesn't get involved in health disparities. That's either Commissioner Jayapal over at Multnomah County or Lou Frederick at the state level through the Oregon Health Authority. But we realized the crisis we're seeing on our streets has an important intersection with the lack of access to addiction treatment and mental health services, so we have actually directly engaged with and supported those efforts. And last but not least, I know it's so important to the people on my team who help elevate and lift communities of color to actually see leaders at the city of Portland who look like them and come from similar backgrounds and lived experiences and histories and traditions. And I'm very proud of the record that not only we're engaged in our office, but throughout the city of Portland, our effort to bring in top flight leaders from all walks of life, including from the Black community. But we have a long way to go. I'll just give you one quick example. We're really good at hiring people of color into leadership roles, and we're really terrible at maintaining them, at keeping them here. Once they're here, we don't engage them and support them and provide them the resources and the tools they need to stay, and I've heard that loudly and clearly too. And so that's one area where we're going to continue to work together. And then maybe the last here is, I'm not going to lead it. I'm going to follow the leadership that's being provided by the communities that have been impacted. And I feel like we've done a really good job, particularly of late, of engaging the Black community in particular, but all communities of color, on all of these disparities, and having those communities tell us what they want and expect from us in terms of being able to meet the needs that they have addressed. That's a long process, it's an ongoing process, it's one I remain committed to.
So let me first say, we're going to hear from Mr. Hobson. This is a space that we definitely respect our mayor in, but we're here to uplift the voices of our Black leaders and hear from their mouths what needs to be done. So if any of them would like to be asked, if you have questions specifically for Black leaders, that's what we are interested in. We don't want to diminish anything that the mayor has brought, but this is a space for Black voices. And if none, we can go ahead and close this out. We have one? Okay.
This is Alex Zielinski with the Portland Mercury. I have a question for really any of the Black leaders here today who want to speak on this. You spoke a lot about the importance of holding the mayor accountable, holding other elected officials accountable. What does that accountability look like? What is actionable ways that these leaders who are not part of your community can prove that they're following your lead?
Can you repeat the question without the mask?
Okay, sorry, I won't sneeze. Many of you raised today that you want to hold the white leaders accountable, people in power accountable, elected officials accountable. What does that look like starting from today? What would you say to the rest of the Black community? How can they hold folks accountable who are in power right now and feel like they're being heard?
I'll start and just say just a couple of things, just from a historical standpoint. The same kind of what has been characterized as a riot, but showing up in mass. Imagine if we showed up at City Hall during the meeting around any of the common issues that we find dear to our hearts, whether it's about education or employment, and when decisions on the city council was being made, you had 4,000 or 5,000 people sitting in that room pushing for what we believe in. I mean, I think part of the accountability is showing up, but showing up on a regular basis around the issues that impact us, that we can actually impact. Historically, in Portland Public Schools, and Ronnie can attest to this because he's been my running mate on many occasions on pushing the Portland Public Schools to do the right thing by our kids. The only way that we've gotten them to move historically is by showing up en masse at school board meetings and holding them accountable to what was right in behalf of our children. The conversations behind closed doors are good, and we always want to attempt to do that first. But oftentimes, we don't show up often enough and consistent enough to get things moved in our direction. So one of the accountability measures would be to push our community to show up around a number of issues and decisions that are being made. If the mayor says he wants black folks at the table, then we want to hold him accountable to that and make sure there's seats at the table for black folks. And if the kind of decisions that we know ought to be in favor of what we need is not made, then we need to show up en masse, not being violent, but just simply saying we are here and we expect more.
I would just briefly add to Mr. Hobbs's remarks that one of the ways I think that we can do a better job of holding our decision makers and our elected officials accountable is to get young people, more of our young people in the room. I'm now 51, so I used to be a younger person. But it's about time that we get some of our younger African-American folks who aspire to be in the roles like you have up here. It's time to get them involved and get them in the rooms as well. So that's something I think we can all do to help hold our elected officials and our decision makers accountable.
I would add that those of us who are often in these privileged spaces where resources and policy and opportunities are being bartered are not bought off. And that in those moments when we can speak up, that we speak up even if there are personal consequences. Now, the thing about that is that sometimes it may lead to frankness and directness in ways that are not custom to those privileged spaces. And one place where I see us failing now is in this COVID response from the state level. We have not had a plan for Black Oregon, despite repeated attempts, despite many closed door meetings and polite conversations. And so folks like me that control lots of capital and influence have to say, what the holy hell is going on? Because we are no different because of that proximity to privilege than George Floyd. He is our brother. That 9-year-old girl witnessing that violence is me. So I will say that I will step up to the call of being direct and to not be cleaved from my people with privilege or bought off. Because these times are showing the virus does not care about my access to a privileged cookout. It does not care who I am friends with or whose Christmas party I'm invited to. And when we say directly to the mayor and to the governor that we need reasonable resources and we need thoughtful engagement with Black Oregonians, we expect answers. And we expect action. So one of the things I will be point blank about, we know there's a policing issue. I'm saying to the mayor, let's stop talking about it. We know that we haven't received the resources we need to fight COVID in Black communities, and I'm saying to the governor and to the director of OHA, let's stop talking about it and do something about it. We will not be bought off.
My colleagues covered a lot. The only thing I would add is accountability comes with transparency when it comes to data. And there is a lot of information that hides in the shadows, where dollars go, as Rakaya was illuminating, where people get support and where they don't. And there is a lot of data that we're not transparent about. What happened with OHA and with our state in terms of who was dying and not collecting information to tell us who was dying and who wasn't, and who was being impacted and who wasn't. And that, of course, impacts where resources flow and where they don't. And so accountability to me is demanding that we have what we need. We have the information we need so that informed decisions are made, and not allowing data to exist in a black box, not allowing a lot of resources to go to this amalgam of things instead of being very intentional going to our communities. And I'd like to see more of our elected leaders being transparent with the data, telling us where they're putting their resources, not learning about the fact that $25 million has gone out the door and we have no idea where it went. That's all.
The comments that have been made regarding Oregon's response to the black community and the virus, I think this is probably one of the best metaphors describing the relationship between the state, the county, and the city with the black community. That everyone knew that this virus had been wreaking hell on black folks all across the country. They saw it coming. To this very day, the Oregon Health Authority has not produced a plan on how to protect black Oregonians, to this very day. And it's not because it was not brought to their attention. The folks that you see up here, together, we approached the Oregon Health Authority. We approached Multnomah County, the city, the governor, and said, hey, we are a vulnerable population. Where is the plan to protect us? And it was a lot of this. And finally, when Tony was talking about the testing, that's not because they woke up one day and said, we ought to do this. It's because we were kicking their rumps about this. The least you can do is set up a testing site in the black community that black people are familiar with and black people respond to. And it took a lot of work just to get that done. So if you want to look at what equity means when people have these discussions, if you can't live up to that in a life and death situation, where you know that when this comes, there's a particular population that will be extraordinarily vulnerable. So what do we do to protect them? Nothing. So the next time they come up to you and talk about how I love black folks and I got equity and I got this, that, and the other, what did you do when our lives were at stake, when our grandparents' lives were at stake, when our children's lives were at stake? What did you do to protect them? Nothing. The sound of one hand clapping, that's what.
So we want to say thank you all for participating today. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, for being here, for allowing us to gather with you, and hopefully we will follow up on all the promises that you provided us today. Just a reminder, June 6th, we will be doing testing here, as well as at the Emmanuel, there will be food provided. So we are getting things done, but if you are interested in doing more, let's gather, let's be intentional, and let's get this done. Thank you guys for coming.